On June 12th, the crash of Air India Flight 171 in Ahmedabad was an absolute shock to the nation. But the tragedy, it didn't just end there with the wreckage. In the weeks that followed, a whole series of consequences have rippled outwards, and that's what we're going to unpack. 260. Let that number just sink in for a moment. That is the total number of lives lost. 241 people on the plane and, just unbelievably, another 19 people on the ground. It's a devastating number, and it's really where the story of the aftermath has to begin. You see, the crash itself wasn't just a single isolated event. It was like a stone dropped in a pond. It triggered a chain reaction, these powerful ripples that have spread out to affect the official investigation, the airline's own crew, and yeah, even the confidence of the entire flying public. Okay, so let's start at the beginning, with the incident itself. A day that truly sent shockwaves across India. So here's how it unfolded. The crash happens on June 12th. Then, get this, just 4 days later, pilots start calling in sick, a lot of them, citing trauma. And then, by the time late July rolls around, the first investigation report is released, and it just turns everything we thought we knew completely on its head. All right, so let's follow that first ripple, the investigation. What has the search for answers actually told us about those final, fatal moments? India's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau came out with a finding that is, well, frankly, it's just stunning. Their initial report says that seconds after takeoff began, both engine fuel switches were moved from run to cutoff. Now, what this does is it starves the engines of fuel, which led to a complete dual-engine failure. The Dreamliner only made it to 625 feet before it stalls and just fell out of the sky. So this finding completely reframes the entire investigation, right? The big mystery is no longer what happened to the plane, but why it happened. The focus now pivots away from the mechanics of the aircraft and squarely onto the psychology inside that cockpit. One major theory investigators are looking at is a psychological concept called the startle effect. And you might have felt a tiny version of this yourself. It's that moment of pure shock when a crisis hits you out of nowhere. That sort of brain freeze that can cause someone, even with years and years of training, to hesitate or make a completely wrong move. Now, in an effort to calm public fears, Air India did its own safety checks on its entire fleet of other Boeing 787s. The airline came out and said that they found absolutely no mechanical or maintenance problems, which was their way of suggesting this was a tragic, one-off event isolated to this specific flight. And the next ripple, this one is probably the most painful to talk about. It's the very, very real human cost for the families who were just left to pick up the pieces.
So Air India started giving out interim compensation. But in a really significant move, its parent company, the Tata Group, set up something called the AI-171 Memorial and Welfare Trust. Through this trust, they announced a payment of 1 crore rupees. That's about $120,000 for each person who lost their life. And they also provided support for the first responders.
But you know, money can't fix everything. The process of identifying and returning the victims has been just incredibly painful. There have been these heartbreaking reports from some of the British families who said they were given the wrong remains, a mistake that just adds another layer of unimaginable grief to what they're already going through. The impact of this tragedy rippled right back into the airline's own workforce, and it kicked off a huge crisis of morale and mental health among its pilots. 112. That number is just staggering. Only 4 days after the crash, 112 Air India pilots called in sick, all of them citing stress and trauma. Now, this wasn't a strike or some kind of labor dispute. It was a massive, collective cry for help, a sign of the immense psychological weight their colleagues were under. And if you look closer, these sick calls came from pilots across the board. It was almost an even split between senior commanders and first officers. So this wasn't about inexperience or anything like that. The trauma hit everyone, no matter how many hours you had in the cockpit. This whole situation just triggered a storm of responses. You had Air India rolling out wellness programs like online yoga, but the pilots were pushing back, saying what they really need are fundamental changes to their schedules to fight burnout. And this created this real tension, especially because you had the Aviation Authority, the DGCA, on one hand saying we need more mental health training, while on the other hand, they were hitting the airline with notices over crew fatigue. And all of this leads to that final, widest ripple, the impact on all of us, the public. The crash has, without a doubt, shaken people's confidence and created this new wave of anxiety about flying. Almost immediately, psychiatrists started reporting a big spike in flight-related anxiety. And we're not just talking about feeling a bit nervous. We're seeing real-world effects. More people asking for therapy, more last-minute flight cancellations, and even this trend of people actively avoiding flying on certain types of planes, like the Dreamliner that was involved in this crash. The constant news cycle, the images of the crash playing over and over, it's fueled these fears, and it's led to things like insomnia and panic attacks. It's also changing how people behave. Some folks are now obsessively tracking the flights of their loved ones. Counseling centers are seeing a huge jump in calls. And some therapists are even turning to flight simulators to help people face and overcome these new fears. So when you put it all together, the crash of AI-171 is so much more than a single accident. It's really become this moment of deep national reflection for India's entire aviation industry. It's shining a bright light on the urgent need for better safety protocols, real mental health support, and just complete transparency for the victims and the public. The road to healing for the families, for the airline, for the country's faith in flying is going to be a very long one. And it really leaves all of us with this one final critical question. How does an entire industry move forward to rebuild not just its planes, but something far more fragile, its trust?